Hey everyone, Reid Henrichs with Valor. The purpose of this video today is to talk about what actual courage looks like rather than faked moral superiority. Let's go ahead and get started. Been paying attention to what's going on. In a lot of places worldwide, there are people rising up against authoritarian government. And one of the best examples that I've seen in a very long time right now is what's happening in China. Now, I know a lot of folks in the United States want to lump a lot of Chinese into one monolithic block of people. But if you grew up in the Cold War, and even if you haven't grown up in the Cold War and you read about some of these historical events, you'll know that there's a large percentage of the Chinese population that wants nothing to do with the Communist Party. They want nothing to do with authoritarianism. They are much more pro Constitution and Bill of Rights than people realize. This is illustrated in Hong Kong earlier, and it's also being illustrated right now. If you pay attention to what's going on in China, you'll see that they've used the pandemic to full advantage. The emperor, Mr. Winnie the Pooh, Xi, has used the last 3 years to lock down his entire population. These people have been kept in their houses, literally under house arrest. They have social credit scores on social media. They're not allowed to speak out against the government. And that's changing. With this recent string of lockdowns, they've gone into this zero policy where if any case happens, they lock the whole country down again. What we're seeing is a lot of parallels to what leftists in the United States want to do. But the real courage comes from these people speaking out. And what's happening in China is that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people right now in Shanghai and other cities across China speaking out against this regime, and not just speaking out against it, doing it in public, saying, down with the Communist Party of China. We want individual freedom. It's very reminiscent of Tiananmen Square. And those of us that grew up in the Cold War remember the iconic photograph of the man in front of the tank. Of protests where literally the Chinese government gunned down thousands of its own people. And if you weren't alive during the Cold War, you were born after the fall of communism in Europe and other places worldwide, you guys know how courageous that is. What I find quite ironic, though, is that there are people in the United States that want to protest things. And look, I love the First Amendment. I'm all about the First Amendment. You have a right to protest. You have a right to assemble. You have a right to free speech. And as the old adage goes, I may not agree with everything you say, but I'll fight for your right to defend it. And I think that a true person of liberty, a person who's truly liberty-minded, even though other people may say things we disagree with, we don't want to shut them down. We don't want to censor them. We don't want them incarcerated. And it's quite the opposite with the authoritarian left in the United States today. Whereas if we look in the 60s, the 1960s, when people were protesting, the so-called hippies or the anti-war movement, not the same thing, but similar. When we look at those kind of protests in the country, they're very similar to what's happening in China today. People in the 60s were protesting the government getting too big. They were protesting the draft, saying the state doesn't own us. We should not be morally compelled by threat of force to participate in an activity that we are against. They also marched in favor of individual rights. In other words, they wanted less government and they wanted more individual liberty. Protests these days are much different in the United States. Protesters in general, a lot of times with a cause, they're not protesting for freedom. They're not protesting for individual liberty. They're protesting to strip rights away from other people. No further example is clearer to me than the Second Amendment in this country. You have people that are protesting in order to strip over a third of the country who exercises the Second Amendment. They want to strip those rights away. So it's quite different. I wonder what people in China today would do if they are actually armed, if they had a Second Amendment. What would they be able to do to the authoritarian government? Just the fact that this video won't be shown in China because I'm being critical of their Winnie the Pooh dictator, who is on record as saying that American gun owners and American gun ownership is a problem for the entire world. Well, our founding fathers knew different. And this is the point I'm trying to make here is people in the United States protesting today to strip rights away from other people. You're not protesting progress. You're a mouthpiece for the authoritarian left that's prolific not only in the West, but prolific throughout the world. China has everything that the authoritarian left in this country wants. They've got lockdowns, constant surveillance, social credit scores, an authoritarian government, a disarmed populace. They've got the dream of the authoritarian left. And I'll tell you what the authoritarian left's dream is for the United States of America. If you go to an airport, that's their vision for society. They want you constantly searched. They want you constantly monitored. They want you disarmed. And if you speak out and protest against what's going on to the government, then you need to be arrested and put away and interrogated and questioned. If you think I'm wrong, look at what's happened the last 2.5 years in this country. There have been people that have absolutely advocated for lockdowns. There have been people that have absolutely advocated for the disarmament of the American populace. That's what's happening right now. Even members of our own government are wanting to strip away an inherent vestige of our citizenship, that want to strip away our rights that we're guaranteed to have under the United States Constitution and codified in the Bill of Rights. And if you don't believe me that people in China and Hong Kong wish that they had a Second Amendment, watch some of the flags that they've been flying the last couple of years. You'll be seeing things like the Gadsden flag right here. They'll say, "We the people." They will say things like the Tree of Liberty. They speak the language of our American Revolution because they've lived under the thumb of authoritarianism for so long that they just don't want to deal with it anymore. You want to look at what a classic example of what Orwell warned against in 1984, Animal Farm. Although he was very critical of Soviet communism, the Chinese took communism and juiced it up on steroids and made it even more prolific. The greatest mass murderer in history was Mao. That's absolutely indisputable. He killed more people than Stalin and Lenin and Hitler put together. And when you look at the programs of China today, it's all about religious repression. It's all about keeping the population disarmed and quiet and in servitude. And the real courage to me, and why I have faith in humanity in general, not only because of my attitude in general, but I have a lot of courage when I see countries across the world and the people in those countries rise up against authoritarianism. It's very refreshing, and I hope this video gets circulated in China, and I hope it gets circulated elsewhere, because there's a lot of people that live outside of the United States that are far more American than the spoiled little brats that have been born here and despise their birthright of freedom and individual liberty. So that's why when I see courage across the country of people standing up against authoritarianism, and these people aren't armed, that takes real courage. It takes real courage to get out there. And I remember watching that lone man stand in front of the tank at Tiananmen Square, and I remember that. And I remember not only the footage, but I remember the pictures, and I remember just how powerful that moment was. Maybe we're going to have another powerful movement in China again. Maybe our fellow brothers and sisters that are enslaved by communism, which is a tale as old as time, maybe they can get inspired by natural rights, by natural law, and know that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. But among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. An authoritarian big government is antithetical and is an absolute enemy to those principles. If you found the information in the video helpful, subscribe to the channel, follow me on social media, that link is down below. If you want to learn how to protect those rights, come on out to Valor Ridge, we can help you. This is Reid Henrichs of Valor Ridge reminding you, the lessons that we learn are written on the tombstones of others. We'll see you on the ridge.